Hello, everybody. This is Gary Matheny. Welcome to the Liberty Observatory. Today is episode 17, and this is in September 2024. I hope everyone is going well, and we are going to discuss further concepts of liberty and freedom and the role of such in government and in public in general. And you're more than welcome to review my previous episodes and kind of fill in a little bit of back information, so to speak, to give you a kind of a broader context of what I'm talking about. And basically, what we're going to talk about today are a few remarks regarding oligarchy. I don't know whether to start the O with a short or long O. Oligarchy, I think, is the way that it's pronounced. It's Olicarcy. And basically, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it is a small group of people having control of a country, of an organization, an institution, etc. Or a government. That's what they mean when they say over a country, generally speaking. And so basically, we use in the vernacular, we use the word ruling elites. And I think that oligarchy is one of these words that both sides enjoy using. I think it was originally coined by the left, and to describe certain types of oligarchies. And the right has picked up on it in a certain respect because we also see, people of the right, see that there is a ruling elite. I think a lot of people, a lot of common people, so to speak, see that there is a ruling elite. And what we disagree on is what to do. And we have, we see different symptoms and we see different causes, but sometimes we see the end result in a somewhat dysfunctional society. But, whenever you have a planet with, 6 or 7 billion people in it, there's going to be a lot of chaos there. It's just the way it is. And so to, try and create a perfect situation is too utopic and would be ultimately too controlling and too oligarchic. And so it's kind of like a circular thing. The more you try and create a perfect or just society, the more you require a ruling elite. And the ruling elite can be anti-democratic and more interested in fostering their own well-being than the well-being of the people. So let's get into some examples of oligarchies. Most people would probably agree that Russia, with Putin, who seems to be president of Russia forever, when things are inconvenient for him, he merely has his friends in the legislature change the Constitution, which must be nice. So you basically have in Russia governance by a small group of people, a ruling elite. People may say the same thing about Ukraine, that in Ukraine you had some super wealthy business people along with leading politicians that basically decided how things should be handled, what should be done, who should make the money, etc., and etc. And that's one reason why some Americans are hesitant to support Ukraine in their war with Russia, is because in the governance of Ukraine, it was corrupt. And it's like, why are we saving a country that is already all screwed up? Other than we want to resist Russia. So I'll let deeper minds than that try and figure out some of these issues on this matter. China is most likely an oligarchy. And basically, China has a president. I think it's President Xin. They're all, half of them are Zins over there, and so, so basically, the president there is for life. Just within the past year, they elected or reelected their leader for life. And so you can see how over time, things are, I had a cup of loose tea this morning. You can see that over time, power is put further and further in the hands of the ruling elite. And they ultimately lust for power. It goes back to the original thought process that power corrupts and absolute power absolutely corrupts. So the more power that they have, the more elitist they become and the less connected they are to the people. Now, how about in America? What about the United States government? Well, some people say that it has been transitioning from a democracy to an oligarchy, and basically meaning a ruling elite. And I'll probably use that word, ruling elite, because it's easier for me to pronounce, to speak in reference to oligarchy. And basically, who are the ruling elite in America? The ruling elite, some people say, is the bureaucracies, the bureaucracies, the underlying agencies, the federal agencies that are implementing rules and regulations that affect our lives, are ultimately deciding our fate. That they even have surpassed our elected officials. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think our elected officials also are part of a ruling elite. Think about it for a moment, that there is some type of hand involved in the midst of people that are ruling us. If you use, for an example, Joe Biden, 14 million people voted for him in primaries, and he won the primaries, and he was set to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. And basically, almost overnight, that changed. We don't know all the ins and outs of that, but he withdrew from the race, and Kamala Harris, within a few days, secured the nomination informally. And so basically, what about the democratic process? How was it ignored? And then on the other side of the coin, you got the Republicans, where Donald Trump won primaries overwhelmingly, state after state after state. I'm not even sure he lost any states. And yet the reigning bureaucracy, the prosecutorial wing of the government, seems intent to finding him guilty as many crimes as possible across as many venues as possible to prevent him from running for president. And so you can see on two sides here, both the Democrat and the Republican side, that the will of the people is being thwarted. And so that means that there is something more powerful at work than the will of the people. There's something more powerful, and that would be the ruling elites. And so for those of you that think that the United States government is slowly but surely evolving into an oligarchy, maybe some of these instincts are right. Now, common to both parties, both major parties, is the tension that exists. Some of it is complementary, and some of it's not. But a tension that exists between what we might call globalists and what we might call America first or nationalists. Which comes first in the American mindset? Does globalism or nationalism come first? And so it's very seldom portrayed in those terms to the people. But globalism believes in such concepts as open borders. I even heard President Obama say one time that he believed in open borders. And so the globalists are, by and large, happy to allow migrants to come in to the United States in an unrestricted way, where a nationalist would say, no, we need to control our borders. Borders are a way of defining what a nation is, and we need to allow immigration in an orderly and cognitive sense where it makes sense at various different levels rather than just letting people into the country. Another thing would relate to free trade. Free trade is a great concept. And by and large, most globalists want free trade in the sense that they can buy and sell goods at large quantities, buy here and sell there in a free fashion without excessive tariffs or excessive taxation. But sometimes there's an underlying problem that develops in the concept of free trade. If you have one country that believes in trade unions, that believes in health and safety, and has certain rules and regulations in place to restrain or limit the free market, and then you have another country that has children labor, almost no rules and regulations, almost something close to either indentured servants or slaves. And so who can make a widget faster and cheaper? The one that has some rules and regulations or the one that has virtually none? Well, the widgets will probably be made faster and cheaper. I'm not saying better in the unregulated society. And so at some point, free trade undermines a country that is more regulated and more controlled. It undermines as far as loss of jobs. How many millions of manufacturing jobs have left America over the last 2 or 3 generations? It's untold. And then there can also be a loss of national security, because we have a national security in producing some of our goods, like steel. I mean, we need a domestic steel market because as a matter of national security, we need steel. I remember I read a book one time about Henry Ford, and him and Thomas Edison teamed up together to try and grow rubber plants in Florida, because the thought was, this is during like the World War I era, early part of the 20th century, the thought was that automobiles were here to stay and we needed rubber for tires. We needed rubber, and there was a national security in tires. We needed to have tires made in America so that we knew there would be tires for Americans and for the American military. So they tried, and Edison never quite got there. Eventually what was developed was synthetic rubber, and that's kind of in the realm that we're living in today. But at the time, there was a national security interest in trying to develop domestic rubber so that tires could be made for Americans and for the American military. And so we're losing a couple of things in the long term when it comes to free trade. So on the one side of the coin, it sounds attractive. On the other side of the coin, there is a loss of nationalism, a loss of Americanization. In other words, the people need to work, they need to have jobs, and there needs to be some minimal restraint of trade. So how do we know that a country is slowly but surely shifting from a democracy to an oligarchy? How do we know that? What are the signs of the times? Well, I do think there's some things that you can observe over time which can kind of like tell you where the scales are tipping. So let's just say you hear remarks in society. It's not what you know, it's who you know. In other words, you're promoted, you gain jobs, you enjoy a standard of living, not based upon meritocracy, but based upon your connectivity to the ruling elite. And so the desire is to connect to the ruling elite because you will find your greatest promotion and your greatest potential by being bestowed power and gifts and rewards from the ruling elite. And so when you hear a lot of people saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know, that is one clue. Another one, you can't fight City Hall. And that's, an old saying that basically says that when you go against the government, you can't win. The government is going to win. And so there's this sense of defeatism from the word go in dealing with governmental entities. Another indication is that people who are in public service get rich. They mean get really rich. I'm not talking about a mere 80 million that is shared by Bernie Sanders and Pocahontas in Massachusetts and one or two others on the left wing of the Democratic Party. I'm talking about people that are getting ultimately hundreds of millions of dollars in public service. And so when you see people get extremely wealthy in public service, there is something wrong. We need to call it something different than public service. We need to call it get rich through connections, because a lot of people are getting rich through connections and has very little to do with public service. Another thing, an indication of a society that's moving towards an oligarchy. There's people who feel like that they are victims, sometimes justifiably so. So there's more and more rebellion, there's more and more boycotts, there's more and more strikes, there's more and more revolution or revolution talk. And so a certain amount of unstableness comes into the community, into the state. And so when the oligarchs exercise more and more power, the people feel more and more frustrated and have less and less a voice in how they're being governed. And you see various types of eruptions occur which attempt to revolt against or protest the oligarchy. And so another thing, and this is preeminent in the United States right now, and that is trusting elections. I have never in my 71 years of life run into as many people who don't trust elections. There are so many people in our country that don't trust elections. So regardless of the presidential election results this fall, I believe there's going to be huge amount of people that don't trust the results. We don't trust the way elections are run. And so when you stop losing confidence in elections, that really undermines your belief in a democracy. And it basically shows you the strength of the ruling elites, that their power is so extensive that they can affect almost every area of our life, including and especially elections. So I said at the beginning of this that the oligarchs um, tend to be a ruling elite, and that the left and the right have a kind of different version of who the oligarchs are, and how to best deal with them. And so the left, who originally coined the term, and it's a word I love but just can't pronounce right, and they tend to believe that corporatist interests, big business, are the oligarchs, the big multinational businesses that control things, and the people behind those big multinational businesses who have a financial interest and a profit motive only as it relates to the relationships that the ruling elite have with the people. In other words, they're exploiting the people for profit motive. And so what is the answer that most people on the left offer to oligarchy? Most people on the left offer um, uh, arming the government, empowering the government to combat it. In other words, there's this huge ruling elite of corporatists, profit-driven big business that need to be combated by who? The government. The government needs to be armed to combat big business. And so the translation in the midst of all this is, instead of having corrupt government, you would have good government. You need to transition government from being corrupt, which a lot of people on both the left and the right view it as such, and it needs to transition to good government, because good government is probably the sole means in which big corporate business interests, the oligarchs, can be safeguarded against. So let's take the right's version of this, the right wing. Well, excuse me, the right wing mostly describes big government as an oligarchy. And so where you, in the left, you have big business, on the right, you have big government. And basically, a lot of people on the right believe that big government is more a threat to society than big business. If you look at it in terms of our freedoms, who is the greater threat to freedom? Is it big business or is it big government? Most people on the right would say that it would be big government. We look at, and I include myself as a conservative, some people describe as a right winger. I try and be fair-minded about everything I do or say. Big brother and big sister. You know, there is a reigning bureaucracy, which some elected officials are fully cooperative with. There's a reigning bureaucracy that encompasses more and more of our life and makes more and more of the decisions for us. So basically, people on the right believe that the United States government is an oligarchy in itself. In other words, it is ruled by a ruling elite. And so the emphasis is more on the government, and on the left, it's more big business interests. And so what solution does the right generally offer to fight the oligarchy? Well, mostly it is to disarm big government. In other words, shrink big government. Shrink big government in favor of free markets and freedom in general. And so basically what you want to have is more freedom among the people so that they can decide for themselves how to live their lives, and they'll deal with, in their own way, big business. You know, big business is probably here to stay. And there's a variety of ways to deal with big business, one of which is self-employment. I've been self-employed since the early to mid 1990s. And so it's a beautiful way in which to deal with big business. You can keep your self-respect and dignity and not feel like you're a corporate cog as a self-employed person. But you got to have the freedom to be able to become self-employed. And so you can see on the left, we need good government substituting for corrupt government. So we need to arm good government to replace corrupt government. And on the right, it's like we need less government, period, because we need to be free in order to make decisions that affect our well-being in the most open and transparent way possible. And so basically, certain indications as to oligarch truisms. And so whenever you see an oligarchy, you tend to see an organization, a group of ruling elites who treat people as a whole and not individually. In other words, you start getting treated like you're a cog. You start getting treated like you're a sheep. You start getting treated as the whole, the community, whatever the community may mean. And so you stop being treated as an individual with individual rights and individual dignity and individual beliefs. And so, the more that you treat the group as a group as compared to individuals individually, the more that you do that, the less sovereignty of the individual because you're thinking in terms of the mass. Okay, and so another thing that oligarchies tend to do is they tend to pit groups against each other, an us versus them situation. It seems to me that gone are the days where people say, we're Americans. We're Americans. We're happy to be Americans. Being American unites us. Where now we seem to be so many different groups that we vie for public or governmental support to advocate the rights of our particular group. You have workers, you have the Chamber of Commerce on behalf of business, you got the gay pride community, you got the African American community, you got, almost every ethnicity, race, and religion has advocacy groups of one type or another. And in some respects, you need to have that. Because if everybody else is advocating their interests and you're not advocating your interests, then basically you're losing out. But to have a society that slowly devolves into all these competing groups, it's not good for a democracy because it plays into the hands of the ruling elite, because there needs to be a ruling elite that controls all these people that hate each other. Where if we thought of ourselves as Americans, and you were my fellow American and I'm your fellow American, we may have different beliefs about this, that, or the other, but we recognize a common ground of American. If we had a more firm belief as our identity as Americans and the United States of America as a group of states voluntarily associated with each other for the common benefit of all people, then we may feel better about who we are instead of having so much self-loathing and distorted history of who we are as Americans. It's, there's a lot of upheaval when you start pitting groups one against the other, and ultimately the winner is the ruling elite. Now, there also is a competition in language. If you think about it, you use the term common man. If you ask a person on the left what a common man is, they'll probably give you a different answer than if you ask them on the right. Who is the common man? If you use the word I'm using today, oligarchy, if the left will give you one term, and the right will probably give you another term. And so there's actually a competition for the use of the language between the right and left, which actually creates even a greater dissension between the two wings. So let's just look at the word patriotism. Well, it was common, and I believe it still is common, at least until January 6th, for the left to say the highest form of patriotism is protest. So protest was elevated significantly to illustrate American patriotism. You know, it was founded on protest. You know, look at the Declaration of Independence. So the highest form of patriotism is protest. And basically, the ruling elite winds up having a heyday because they try and steer the common language in a direction that best serves them. And so what happens in the midst of all this is that there's a tension that ultimately evolves. And that tension that ultimately involves between the oligarchy and the people is the top-down ruling elites working against the organic we the people. What the ruling elites imply is this concept that people know better than you do how to run your life. They're making the rules and regulations. They're telling you how to live your life. Organic is springing up from the people. If you're a music fan, you can kind of discern this over time. You can tell the commercial music that comes out of, let's say, Nashville, the country western that's commercial. Compare that to some of the country western that's more organic coming from the people. And I tend to like that which is organic almost in every respect. I like that in church life. I like that in community. That's one reason why I live in a small town in southeast Missouri, because it's more organic than some big city where I was born and raised in, St. Louis, where maybe of necessity it has to have a ruling elite. But I will cling to the opinion that regardless of circumstance, the best rule of government should be in the midst of we the people. Whatever government does, it should be we the people, coming from the people, rather than a ruling elite telling us how to live our lives. Okay, what is the left and right doing about all this? Well, there's a tension between the left and right, and maybe rightfully so, and there should be. Because the left is working very hard for their version of good government, and the right is working very hard for limited government. And so you're having this tension that's between the right and the left. And I do think that we all have something in common, and that is that we oppose despotism. Despotism is the absolute exercise of power, the absolute exercise of power. That means that total discretion in the exercise of power is left to the ruling elites. In other words, whatever freedoms you had in the past are gone. Things are decided for you by others. It's the old saying, power corrupts, absolute power absolutely corrupts. So the more power that an entity has, that someone has over your life, the more corrupt it will become. You have to understand that power is drawn to power. It becomes lustful at a certain point where you're driven by power for power's sake, and you lose sight of who you are governing. And it becomes all about who you know and what you know. So what does the right suggest? The left wants good government. That's one that's not corrupt. The right wants to starve the beast. They want to slay the Leviathan. A growing government that has more and more impact over our lives, and we have less and less freedom, needs to be starved. In other words, stop spending money. We're $32 trillion in debt. The less money that we spend, the less control the government would have. Remember the capitalist golden rule. He who has the gold rules. And so as long as the instruments of spending power is within the government, and it can be unlimited spending power, the greater the power it's going to have over your life. And so limit spending, limit it. Let's go back to the concept of balanced budget. So what do I think is the only course that makes sense? Of course, I think freedom is the only course that makes sense. I think it's freedom, and it makes me think of the words of Sam Adams, and I'm paraphrasing. He's the older cousin of John Adams, the second president of the United States. And he basically wrote a letter to his daughters that said, our best opportunity for happiness is liberty. If we all want to have the best opportunity for our happiness, liberty. And so liberty and freedom makes the most sense for the most people. And that is what causes us to fight back against the ruling elites, because they never become ruling elites, and we stay, we the people. Thank you very much for joining me today. Stay with us, and we'll have another episode in the next week or two. I hope everybody has a great week, and God bless you.